Jack had grown up hearing tales about the old lighthouse on the edge of Fairview, the one with the black beacon that hadn't shone in nearly a century. Locals swore it was cursed, a dark secret that loomed over the town like a bad omen. Kids dared each other to approach it, adults warned them away, and the bravest turned pale at even mentioning it. Jack, though, had always been fascinated. So, when he found an anonymous invitation shoved under his door, inviting him to work as a keeper for the Fairview Lighthouse, he ignored his mother's cries and his friends' warnings. He packed up and drove to the lighthouse on a foggy, cold evening, excitement overshadowing his nerves. The letter came with a set of handwritten rules. Most of them seemed strange, but he figured they were just local folklore to keep people out. But as he climbed the lighthouse steps, he read them anyway, feeling an odd chill sink in with each word. They were as follows. Rule 1. Do not enter the lighthouse until nightfall. The beacon doesn't like visitors during the day. Rule 2. Upon entering, lock the door behind you with the silver key, but do not throw away the bronze key. It will be your only way out. Rule 3. The beacon must be turned on at exactly 3:33 a.m., not a minute before or after. Rule 4. Keep the radio tuned to 103.6 FM. If you hear a voice calling your name, do not answer. Turn the volume down and wait until the voice fades. Rule 5. If you see a figure in the distance, standing in the fog, do not attempt to get a closer look. Close the curtains, turn off the lights, and wait until dawn. Rule 6. Never, and this is crucial, never leave the third floor unattended for more than 13 minutes. If you do, it will come down from the beacon room. You'll know it by the way shadows bend around it. Rule 7. Should you hear footsteps coming down the spiral stairs, go up to the next floor immediately. Don't look back. Close the door behind you. Pray it stops. Rule 8. If you hear scraping at the door at any point, stay silent. The thing outside is searching for voices. It knows your name now. Don't give it a reason to believe you're inside. Rule 9. Remember, this isn't just any lighthouse. It is SCP-096's new containment area. If by chance you hear wailing from below, do not look down. Keep your eyes closed. SCP-096 does not like to be seen. Jack laughed nervously, stuffing the letter back in his coat pocket, though his hands shook a little. SCP? That was fiction, wasn't it? He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the towering lighthouse, silhouetted against the waning dusk. No turning back now. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Jack took his first step inside, locking the door with the silver key. In the silence, he could almost hear the pulse of the place, a low hum just below the edge of sound. He climbed up the spiral staircase, his footfalls echoing ominously. Jack settled in the keeper's room on the third floor, a musty old chamber filled with outdated equipment, a bed, and an ancient radio. He turned the dial to 103.6 FM, static crackling through the silence, and checked his watch. 11:15 p.m. It was going to be a long night. After an hour of uneventful waiting, a soft scratching sound came from the door below. Jack froze. Rule 8 echoed in his mind. His heart hammered as he clenched his jaw, gripping the edge of the table. Stay silent. He counted his breaths, each one feeling like it would give him away. The scratching went on for what felt like an eternity, turning into a scraping, then a slow, frustrated pounding. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Jack let out a shaky exhale. Just as he was settling back, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming up the staircase. His blood ran cold. He remembered Rule 7. Go up to the next floor. Don't look back. He scrambled up to the fourth floor, shutting the door behind him. As he pressed his ear to the door, He heard the footsteps pause, then turn around and fade into the depths below. Jack climbed to the top floor, checking his watch. 3:32 a.m. The room was bare, with a dusty lantern resting on the console. He took a deep breath and flicked the switch at precisely 3:33. The beacon buzzed to life, casting its dim, blackish light through the room, illuminating a figure. A figure standing in the fog outside the lighthouse, just barely visible through the old, grimy window. Jack's throat tightened. He recalled Rule 5, close the curtains. Don't look. But his curiosity was overpowering, the dark shape too mesmerizing. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, its face obscured. It didn't seem to move, yet it filled him with an overwhelming sense of dread. He forced himself to look away, grabbing the worn curtains and pulling them shut, blocking the figure from view. But the image stayed with him, burned into his mind like an afterimage, the sensation of being watched lingering heavily. The night wore on, and exhaustion settled in. Jack's eyes grew heavy, his nerves fraying. Just as he started to drift off, a faint wail broke the silence. He stiffened, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. The wail grew louder, echoing up from below. SCP-096, the letter had said. Don't look down. Keep your eyes closed. He squeezed his eyes shut, resisting every instinct to glance down the staircase. The wailing grew desperate, as if the creature was in unimaginable pain. He kept his hands over his ears, fighting the compulsion to look. Minutes passed, then silence settled like a heavy fog, dense and suffocating. Finally, Jack opened his eyes, catching his breath, but he still felt the presence below, lurking just out of sight. By 5 a.m., Jack was numb with fear, jumping at every creak and groan of the old lighthouse. He thought he was nearing safety until he heard the static on the radio shift. A voice, distorted and faint, crackled through.
Jack, can you hear me?
Jack froze. It was his mother's voice, sweet, warm, unmistakable. He reached for the radio, his hand hovering over the volume knob. But then he remembered Rule 4. If you hear a voice calling your name, do not answer. He turned the volume down, holding his breath as the voice grew desperate, pleading. His hands shook, his mind screaming at him to respond. But he held fast, waiting as the voice faded into the static once more. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the oppressive weight of the lighthouse seemed to lift. Jack released the bronze key and unlocked the door, stepping out into the morning air, lungs filling with relief. But as he reached the bottom of the cliff, he turned back to look at the lighthouse one last time. In one of the windows, he saw a dark figure staring back at him, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. The letter's final words echoed in his mind. SCP-096 has adapted to this place, and now it knows your face. It had been nearly a year since Jack escaped the Fairview Lighthouse, but the memories still haunted him every night. His friends noticed the change, how he never smiled, how he jumped at every shadow. He'd abandoned his dreams of adventure, of exploring the strange and the unknown. Jack had grown cold, hollow, fearful. But just when he thought he'd put the lighthouse behind him, the nightmares started again. Visions of the black beacon, casting a dead light over an endless ocean, of something lurking in the shadows, waiting, reaching, and every night, he'd have endless nightmares. One night, he awoke drenched in sweat to find something on his bedside table. His heart stopped. It was a letter, yellowed and torn at the edges, just like the one he'd received. His hands trembled as he opened it. To the Keeper, you have broken the rules. You saw it, you heard it, and now it knows you. There is a debt to be paid. Return to the lighthouse. You have 24 hours. Jack dropped the letter and backed away, his pulse racing. He knew he couldn't ignore it. The lighthouse had clawed its way into his life, into his mind, and now it wanted him back. He tried to convince himself it was a prank, that someone was playing with him. But deep down he felt the familiar chill, that primal fear gnawing at his bones. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows, waiting. He packed a flashlight, a knife, and a silver chain his grandmother had once given him for protection. He didn't know if it would help, but it was better than nothing. Just as the sky turned dark and heavy with storm clouds, he drove toward Fairview, toward the waiting nightmare. The storm battered the cliffs as he arrived at the lighthouse, thunder rumbling across the ocean. The structure loomed above him, ominous and eternal, its black beacon silent but somehow alive, pulsing with an energy he could feel in his bones. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, feeling the weight of the darkness close in around him. The door slammed shut behind him. A scrap of paper was nailed to the wall, illuminated by a faint, sickly glow from a single flickering light bulb. New rules. Jack's stomach twisted as he read them. Rule 1. This time, the bronze key must stay with you. If you lose it, you will not leave this place. Rule 2. The radio will play on its own. Tune it to 88.9 FM. Do not change the frequency under any circumstances. Rule 3. There will be footsteps echoing from above. Do not attempt to find the source. It will find you if you break the rules. Rule 4. Do not check your watch. Time is a concept that doesn't belong here. You will leave when it lets you. Rule 5. If you hear knocking at the door, answer it. Open the door, look down, and whisper, "I am only a visitor." Then close the door immediately. Rule 6. When you reach the beacon room, stand in the center and do not move. If you feel a cold hand on your shoulder, close your eyes and count to 7. Do not open your eyes until the hand lets go. Rule 7. SCP-096 is still here, but it has changed. It does not mind being seen anymore. If you encounter it, pray. Rule 7 was scrawled in blood-red ink, shaky, almost as if the writer had been trembling as they wrote. Jack forced himself up the stairs, each step echoing in the empty silence. Every corner, every shadow seemed to shift and twitch as he climbed. He could feel the walls pressing in on him, cold and alive. The old, worn-out radio on his belt clicked to life, a soft whisper crackling through the static.
88.9.
The voice whispered. Jack flinched, tuning the dial with a shaking hand. A soft melody, haunting and melancholic, filled the air. He recognized it, a lullaby his mother used to sing to him. But the words were wrong, distorted, as if someone else was singing them now. The first set of footsteps echoed from above. He climbed past the 3rd floor, feeling the pull of something watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. As he turned the corner, he glanced at a nearby window and saw a figure in the fog, standing perfectly still, staring at him. Its eyes were hollow, black voids, pulling him in like dark, hungry pits. Jack tore his gaze away, feeling a cold sweat prick his skin. He remembered Rule 3. Do not attempt to find the source. It will find you if you break the rules. But the figure didn't go away. He could feel its gaze following him, even as he shut his eyes, even as he counted his breaths, even as he tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. The figure began to knock on the window. Softly at first, then louder, until the sound became deafening. Jack couldn't take it anymore. He ran up the stairs, desperate to escape, his footsteps pounding against the metal as he climbed higher and higher, hoping the figure wouldn't follow. The beacon room was just as he remembered it, dark and silent, a cold fog seeping in from unseen cracks. He felt a presence behind him, an icy hand pressing down on his shoulder. He remembered Rule 6, close your eyes and count to 7. He shut his eyes tight, counting slowly, his voice trembling. He could feel the pressure growing, the cold seeping into his bones, each second stretching into eternity. 5, 6. The hand tightened, nails digging into his skin. 7. The hand released him and the room went silent. He opened his eyes, but he was no longer alone. In the far corner stood SCP-96, but it wasn't as he remembered it. Its face had twisted, split into jagged, unnatural angles, its eyes open, unblinking, staring right at him. The thing took a slow, shuddering step forward, its limbs contorting in ways that defied logic, the sound of bones cracking echoing through the room. Jack's heart raced. It does not mind being seen anymore. The creature lurched forward faster than he could react. Jack stumbled back, tripping over the uneven floor, crawling toward the staircase. The entity's limbs scraped across the floor as it advanced, relentless, hungry. He could feel its breath, icy and rancid, brushing against his skin. Jack scrambled down the stairs, the creature following, its guttural moans filling the lighthouse, reverberating through the walls. His vision blurred, his chest tightening as he fought to breathe. He reached the door, clutching the bronze key, hands shaking so violently he could barely insert it into the lock. Just as he turned the key, he heard a whisper.
Jack, you can't leave.
He froze, his breath catching. It was his mother's voice again, soft, gentle, pleading. He turned around, and there she stood in the doorway. Her face was wrong, her eyes dark and empty, her mouth twisted into an unnatural smile. She took a step toward him, and he saw the truth. Her body moved with jerky, unnatural motions, her neck twisted at an odd angle, her arms elongated, stretching toward him. Jack shoved the door open, running out into the night, his heart pounding. He didn't look back as he sprinted through the rain, the lighthouse looming behind him, the echoes of whispers and footsteps fading into the storm. As he reached his car, he caught one last glimpse of the lighthouse, its black beacon glowing faintly in the distance. And he saw them, figures, dozens of them, crowding the windows, staring down at him, their hollow eyes following him as he drove away. But as he sped down the empty road, he felt a chill settle over him. The radio crackled to life, that same lullaby playing, the voice soft and distorted.
Jack, we're waiting.